Good morning, everyone. We are Group 101. My name is V,
Cindy, Tanjie,
Racing.
Cheering.
Today, our group will be presenting on transboundary haze pollution in Malaysia, which we analyze as a negative externality of production. Malaysia faces recurring haze mainly due to large-scale forests and peatland fires in Indonesia. Burning is widely used because it is an extremely cheap and fast land clearing method for agricultural expansion. However, the smoke does not stay within Indonesia. It drifts into Malaysia and leads to several air pollution. During major haze episodes, API readings in several Malaysian states reach unhealthy levels, causing school closures, health problems, and disruption to normal daily activities. This clearly represents a negative externality because Indonesian producers enjoy the private benefits of low-cost burning, while Malaysians bear the external social costs. In this presentation, we will explain the economic theory behind this externality, the impacts on stakeholders, evidence from research, and the policies implemented by Malaysia, Indonesia, and ASEAN before concluding our key findings. Now, I will pass it to Racing to explain how this situation fits the economic concept of a negative externality.
Haze pollution fits the definition of a negative externality of production. Farmers and plantation companies rely on burning because it keeps their marginal private costs low. They only pay for their own private expenses such as labor, equipment, and time. However, Malaysians face the marginal external costs such as respiratory illnesses, productivity loss, and environmental damage. Because these external costs are not included in the producer's decision, the market ends up overproducing pollution. The diagram helps shows this clearly. The marginal private cost curve is lower than the marginal social cost curve because burning imposes harm on others. In an unregulated market, burning happens at the market quantity, which is where the marginal private costs intersect the marginal private benefits. However, the socially efficiency quantity is known as the socially optimal quantity, where the marginal social costs intersect with the marginal social benefits. The difference between the market quantity and the socially optimal quantity shows how pollution is overproduced. The shaded welfare loss area represent the net damage to Malaysian society. This demonstrates market failure because the polluters do not internalize the external costs they create. Next, Tanjie will explain how this externality affects different stakeholders and what research shows about its impact.
This negative externality affects multiple stakeholders groups in Malaysia. Households face higher risk of respiratory disease, increased medical expenses, and disruptions such as school closures. Business suffers from lower productivity, reduced tourism activity, flight cancellations, and the losses for outdoor industries. Next, the government faces increased spending on healthcare, monitoring, and haze mitigation measures. The environment also suffers long-term ecological damage, especially peatlands that release large amounts of carbon when burned. Next, studies show how significantly increased hospital admissions reduce labor productivity and creates a long-term health risk. Atmospheric research confirms that smoke from Indonesian hotspots travel into Malaysia due to the wind patterns. Burning continues because it is cheap, enforcement is weak, and the land governance challenges persist. Next, the Malaysia's domestic policies mainly reduce the exposure. These include the API monitoring, healthcare advisories, school closures, and the cloud seeding. However, these measures cannot address the root cause because the burning occurs outside Malaysia. I'll now pass it to Cindy, who will explain the Indonesia's policy and ASEAN's regional approach and the economic instruments used to address the issue.
Indonesia has introduced several measures to reduce fires, including peatland restoration, revetting, canal blocking, and community programs promoting non-burning land clearing. However, progress is limited by weak enforcement, conflicting land ownership, and insufficient funding. Many smallholders still rely on burning because it remains the cheapest method. At the regional level, ASEAN's Transboundary Haze Agreement focuses on hotspot monitoring, information sharing, and coordinated responses. But compliance is voluntary and enforcement is weak. Limited political commitment and the free rider problem reduce its effectiveness. There are also several economic instruments that could help internalize the externality. A Beethoven tax would raise the cost of burning to reflect the true social damage. Regulations and fines can discourage burning, but they require strong monitoring and non-corrupt enforcement. Subsidies for clean land clearing alternatives can encourage farmers to shift away from burning, although they must be targeted properly. Overall, the most effective solution requires a combination of taxes, regulation, subsidies, and stronger regional cooperation. To wrap up our presentation, I will pass it to Shibing for the conclusion.
To conclude, transboundary haze persists because the private cost of burning in Indonesia does not reflect the full social cost experienced in Malaysia. This gap between MPC and MSC leads to overproduction of pollution and significant welfare loss. Malaysia's policies protect citizens but cannot solve the source of the problem. Indonesia's measures have potential, but weak enforcement and cost incentives making burning continue. ASEAN cooperation is important, but without binding enforcement, its impact remains limited. A long-term solution requires internalizing the external costs, improving enforcement, and strengthening regional cooperation. Only with combined economic instruments and coordinated action can the region reduce the severity and frequency of haze pollution. Thank you so much.